think one of the biggest surprises that we have when we wake up to enlightenment, when we awaken, is we discover that we're not the person that we thought we were. We're not the person. We're not the person that was striving for enlightenment. What we are in reality is the consciousness in which that person and all his strivings and all that person's perceptions of the world and the universe, we're that consciousness in which all of that can be. We're consciousness itself, not the person. And that's a relief, really. It's a relief, because all the problems in the mind, all of the pent-up emotions, feelings, all of the things going on in our life situation, we find that is not who we are in reality. That is not the self. That's not the I. That's not your being. That's not the reality of who you are, of what you are. And, we can get some sense of this even before awakening, because even now, as you're listening, you can be aware that you're listening, and you can be aware that you're watching. And so you can be aware of the mind. You can be aware of the thinking. You can be aware of the feelings. You can be aware of the person. And so you, who you are the observer. You are the awareness that is aware of the person. But you are not the person in reality. And this is it's just common sense. The observer is the subject, it's the I. And the I observes the mind. The self observes the mind, the feelings, the body. And so here all along we've thought that we were this person, this individual person. And because of that, we were caught in all the turmoil in the mind that goes on at times, and in the emotions and the feelings, and in the things that are happening in the world, in our life situation. We're all caught up in that. But in reality, we find that that's not the truth of who we are. It's not, really hasn't much to do at all with what we are in reality. We are consciousness. We're a pure consciousness. And it's just that consciousness has gotten caught in the objects of observation. That awareness has been caught in the objects of awareness. And this is the sort of common state in the waking state awareness. Waking state awareness means that awareness itself is identified with the objects of experience. It's identified with all the objects that we see out here in the world. It's identified with the mind, which is an object of experience, of awareness. We're identified with the feelings. We're identified with the person. So our consciousness itself, awareness itself, it's identified with the objects of experience. And it doesn't know itself. It doesn't experience itself. So our true self, our real self, has not been able to experience itself. And it's looking for itself out here for some fulfillment, for some joy, for some happiness, some peace, some love. We're looking out here in the objects of experience. But we're not looking into the self itself. And it's the self itself is pure peace. It is pure joy. It is pure freedom. It is pure love itself. And so due to that false identification with the objects of experience, the self doesn't know itself. It doesn't experience itself. It just experiences objects. This mind, this body, this person is an object. It's an object in awareness, an object in consciousness. And we are consciousness itself. We are pure consciousness itself. So you see, our sense of self, the sense of who we are, the sense that I am, the sense that I exist, our innate sense of being, it's been identified with just the mind-body person. And it has been stifled due to that false identification. The real nature of our being, the real nature of ourself has been completely stifled, completely collapsed into a small reality, a tiny fraction of what we are in reality. And when awakening takes place, what awakening means, awakening to enlightenment, to the first awakening in enlightenment, what that means is the sense of self that has been identified as being this person, which is such an obvious thing. We go through our life believing and experiencing that we are this person, and really it's such an obvious thing, but we didn't think of looking a little bit more deeply into ourselves to find out if that was actually true. But it's not true when you look a little bit more deeply into yourself. And it's just like when we look at the sun going around the earth. It's obvious, sun goes around the earth. But in reality, that's not true. The earth goes around the sun. It's just an appearance that the sun goes around the earth. But it's the obvious experience. Now, similarly, the sense of self, we experience that I am this person, that this is who I am. But in reality, when we look a little more deeply, we see that no, I am the awareness. I am the consciousness in which this person exists. And so the experience that I am this person, in reality, is just an appearance. It just appears that I am this person. It's not a fact. It's not the reality. It just appears like that because the self itself doesn't know itself. It's completely identified with being the person. It's a case of mistaken identity. Our identification has become lodged from such a long history of experience of being this person. It's gotten caught in the identification that, yes, this is who I am. And because it's not true, the I is not this person. And because it's not true, the mind builds up a false identification. The sense of self being swallowed by the mind, lost in the mind and the me. We try to create a false sense of self, and we do all sorts of things to boost our self-esteem, our self-worth, our self-confidence. But we can never become complete, totally complete. There's always no matter how much joy and fulfillment and peace and happiness that we experience in our life, it's incomplete and it's temporary. It's not lasting. It's not a lasting peace, a lasting fulfillment. And this is because this person is not who we are in reality. And this world that this person sees, it cannot provide the fulfillment that we are really looking for, that is really our nature of our own being. And it's interesting that the real true nature of our being that we've been looking for out here, in fact, the real nature of ourself is that the self itself, when it knows itself and is not lost in the identification of all the objects of experience, when it knows itself as pure peace, pure eternal peace, a peace that is not a temporary experience. It knows itself as pure joy, a pure joy, a complete joy that is not temporary. Doesn't fade, and it doesn't end in some kind of disappointment. It's an everlasting joy. And it's a permanent freedom, because it is freedom itself. It is unbounded and unrestricted by the mind, by the me, by the problems, by the worries, by the things that go on in our life experience that keep us into the me and the mind. It's me, it's my problems, it's my things, my worries and my troubles that are happening, and my joys and my pleasures. It all creates a sense of individual sense of self, when in reality the self is not individual. Your real self, your real being, your real sense of self, the real self is free. It is not individual, it is cosmic. Your consciousness is not individual consciousness. Your consciousness in reality is cosmic consciousness. It is cosmic. It is unlocalized. There is no edge to that sense of self. The sense of self is not just isolated to the mind-body individual. The sense of self is everywhere. It's unbounded. It's eternal. It's infinite. It is the only absolute, the only true absolute that there is. Because this person that you think you are, it's not absolute. It's relative. It changes throughout life. It changes. It gets older, and eventually it will pass. All of your friends, all of your family, eventually they will go. They will be gone. But there's one thing that remains eternal, and that is the essence, the true essence of who you are, of what you are, what the self is, what your being is, what your innermost true essence is in reality. and the interesting thing is that innermost essence, which previously was maybe just a vague sense or a vague idea, when the shift to enlightenment occurs, it's no longer a vague idea, a vague sense. Well, in fact, the vague sense is that I am this person. You just still have a vague sense that I am this individual person, this individual being. But in reality, the I, the true sense of self, has become unbounded, absolute, more concrete than any of this concreteness out here. It's the truth of who you are. It's the real reality that we've missed. And why we've missed it is because waking state consciousness is complete identification consciousness, completely identified with the objects of the experience. And so that the self, the innermost self, doesn't get a chance, it doesn't get an opportunity to see itself, just to experience itself and to know itself and to be itself. It is something that it is not. It can only be, when it doesn't know itself, it can only be something that it is not, and that is this person, because it gets identified with the mind, the body, the person, because it's such an obvious thing. But this mind, body, person in reality is not what we are. It's not who we are in reality. It's not the self. It's a mechanism of self to experience. And in reality, to experience itself. But the shift that takes place in your sense of being, in your sense of self, from being this person, being identified with being this person, to being absolute, unbounded, infinite being, infinite consciousness. That shift that takes place is a very real shift that takes place at some point, and it takes place in some point within you, and you directly experience the reality of who you are and of what you've been all along, who you've been all along. And so we've just been in a state of a false identification, of a mistaken identity as this person. And this shift that takes place when the sense of self shifts from being this individual person to being that cosmic awareness, cosmic unbounded, unlocalized consciousness that you are in reality. When that shift happens, that's called self-realization, or cosmic consciousness. The consciousness is no longer individual, it's cosmic. And so what that means is that the self knows itself. The self experiences itself now and is no longer identified with the mind, with the body, with the objects of perception. The self knows itself. And this state of self-realization, it's the most essential, most necessary, most basic. It's the most natural state of being that is. We come back home to our natural state of being full, being complete, being perfect peace and joy and freedom that we are in reality. All the things that we've been looking for out here that we could never find, only temporarily, they are the nature of our own being, and we rest in our true nature. And this is the first step in knowing the totality of what we are, in knowing what this world really is, what life really is, what God really is. In order to know any of that, we have to know the self. We have to know the eternal reality of the self. We have to be it, not know it just on an intellectual basis or on some level of mood, but we actually have to become that infinite consciousness, the infinite self that we are.